back. I am a layman Pascal. This is the Integral Stage series where we talk to the kind of dubious malcontents who can't help but express their ideas about depth, transformation, and integration through podcasts, YouTube videos, and other forms of online content. Who are these people? What do they collectively understand and point towards? And how can we help to connect, clarify, and amplify what they're doing? That's the project, and helping us figure it out today is some guy named Ralph. Ralph, tell us who you are and where people can find some of your online content.
Okay. So my name's Ralph Cree, and online I've got a YouTube channel called Body, Heart, Mind, Spirit, and I've got quite a lot of videos up there, and I have a website called bodyheartmindspirit.co.uk, and a Facebook page, Body, Heart, Mind, Spirit. I think if you look that up, it would be Body, Heart, Mind, Spirit UK. And I live in England, southwest of England. And I also, you guys, because of your amazing podcast, you've inspired me to do my own podcast. So that will be available. You'll be able to find that on my website. It will be up on YouTube and all the podcast places. But that's really exciting.
Is it going to have that same name, Body, Heart, Mind, Spirit?
I'm not going to say the name because it may change between now and when it goes live. Okay. But the basic premise is I'm into practice, integral life practice. And I mean, integral life practice is for the integral folk. That's an easy catch-all for it. But, basically practices of body, heart, mind, and spirit integrated, long-term practice over years and years, and how it evolves and how they integrate and potentiate each other. So my podcast is interviews with people about their personal story with of practice, an integrated, multidisciplinary, holistic practice, and what that looks like. These are real, juicy, living conversations with people about the nuts and bolts, the day-to-day, the successes, the failures, all of that kind of thing. So making it quite personal. I mean, nobody gets into integral stuff without loving theory. But I also really enjoy the practice, and I found some of the best lessons I've learned have been through a narrative delivery. So, listening to somebody's story. There's a really good podcast called Buddha at the Gas Pump, which, do you know that one?
Yep. Yeah.
So I listened to like 400 hours of a few years ago. And I really, really enjoyed listening to normal people talk about their awakening experiences. Because we all spend a lot of time listening to the kind of A-listers, the big famous teachers and their stories and stuff. But there's a kind of gap. So if you were just getting into this stuff, there seems to be a long way between you and, the masters, the people that have been doing this stuff for, they're in their 70s or 80s or whatever. And I want to kind of fill the gap in between with people that have been doing these practices for, from a couple of years up to several decades, and really have a real juicy conversation about what it's been like,
Do you think we collectively form the wrong impression of spiritual practice by over-attending to that handful of very prominent success story people who want to get their message out? Like, are we getting a skewed version of spiritual life and spiritual practice by overemphasizing the teachers and adepts, so to speak?
Yeah. Is your connection all right? No. Is it your connection?
You're staggering a little bit on mine.
Am I?
Yeah,
Okay. Well, the audio is the important bit, isn't it?
exactly. Yeah, we can always strip the video off if we need to.
Yeah, my internet connection is not very good, so I'm on a hotspot on my phone. So I think it kind of comes down a bit to Ken's teaching of the first person, second person, and third person approach. And so I've been doing these kind of practices for like about 25 years, and probably the first 10 years of my practice, I was kind of in a third person and second person relationship with these practices and the realizations that accompany them. And then when I came across Ken's work in 2007, this thing of the three faces of spirit, or just more generally, the first person, second person, third person approach, suddenly that first person part slotted in for me, and I was able to own my own version of these things that I've been reading about, or going to hear, these ancient Tibetan masters, talking about, and making it my own. But I think I had an allergy towards making those things my own, because I had the kind of green postmodern dislike for the potential narcissism that owning your own divinity or greatness. So once I got over that, things really started to change. And I think what I like now about the age we live in is you're not, say, I really like Ramana Maharshi's stuff, but you're reading books that were written down by somebody who attended his teachings, and that was a long time ago, and it's not interactive. You can't ask questions. Whereas if, for example, recently I've been working with Samuel Bonder and Linda Bonder, and we've been connecting on Zoom in person, and I can ask them questions in real time, and that's been really important.
When you say you were primarily focused on third person and second person practices back in the day, can you tell us a little bit more about what that was like? What do you consider to have been third and second person type approaches?
Well, I had a first person thing going on. I've been taking psychedelics since I was 14, and I'm 42 now. So psychedelics deliver a first person experience, without fail, but more to do with the sort of meditation stuff. So I've been meditating since I was 18, and started off the usual way, reading books and stuff and going to see teachers. I went to India and Nepal backpacking, and saw old Tibetan guys who'd been in caves for 40 years and they could hardly see anymore, and they were speaking through translators and stuff, and it was this really exotic world of Tibetan Buddhism. I really fell in love with that, and I did a degree at university studying religions. It was a place called the School of Oriental and African Studies in London. It's a really cool university, and so I was learning about it in an academic context, in a kind of third person way, but I was also meditating. But I was meditating the usual way it starts out with enlightenment is a goal. You're sort of chasing, trying to achieve it. It's out there, and that went on for quite a few years until I suddenly realized I was actually reading Ken's pointing out instructions in one of his books in 2007, and I've noticed for the first time ever that my own awareness is what I've been looking for. And it was so simple. I couldn't believe, I was just shocked. And, and I realized that, I hadn't achieved anything. I'd been like that my whole life, just like everybody else. I just hadn't seen it. So that's kind of what I mean about the and there's in the second, I had some mentors, some teachers who I was in a second person relationship with, but that kind of making it my own didn't really happen till about 2007, and that really potentiated a lot of stuff.
So you find integral theory a pretty good conceptual language to try to balance out thinking about spiritual life, dealing with teachers and traditions, and also exploring your own experience.
Absolutely. I mean, it is a psychoactive theory, for sure. And but at the end of the day, I was really into the work of Idris Shah for a long time, the Afghan Sufi, and he did this book called the Book of the Book or something like that, and it's quite a big book, but it's only got printing on about 10 pages, and all the rest is blank. And so the message there is you only need actually a little bit of information, and then you've just got to act on it. So I've always been, I don't know if you remember back on the Integral Life website, there was a thing where you could figure out what your native quadrant was. Did you ever do that? Yeah. So, I came out quite strongly as upper right. I'm an action person. I'm all about putting things into practice, doing it, learning enough, and then just doing it and experimenting. So most of my, I do want to say about my podcast, if anybody listening to this, who does an integral practice, so whether it's body, heart, mind, spirit. By body I mean physical practice, heart, some kind of psychotherapeutic thing, relationship work, mind, some theoretical, the powerful theories that you engage with, and then also spirit. So it could be meditation practice, prayer, psychedelics, that kind of thing. If you do that and you would like to share your personal story about that's the journey of your practice, if you go to my website, bodyheartmindspirit.co.uk, and go to the contact page, just contact me and I would love to do an interview with you about it. But so in terms of the content I've put out so far on YouTube, it's mainly I've been teaching integral meditation for about 3 years, and what I do is I film the workshops and then break them up into smaller bits and put them up on YouTube. So most of the content's that. It's a little bit about what I would call non-duality as well. But I want to do some more videos about psychotherapy. I've done training in voice dialogue and shadow work, and I want to do some videos about that. I also do body weight strength training, which is another great passion of mine, and I've got one video up on that at the moment, but there's going to be more content along those lines. But at the moment, it's mainly the integral meditation stuff. Yeah,
seems to me there's an interesting link between the sort of the Idris Shah book and the idea of just needing a little bit of content, and this idea of focusing on people's practice journeys. Because it seems like you can start practicing with very little information up front. And then what happens in the journey of your practice is a lot of the implicit structures of your understanding come forward. And when you listen to people's practice stories, I mean, if you have that background in theory, you can recognize those points that are coming out. But really, whatever stage you're at isn't defined by the kind of content you hold in your mind. It's defined by the structure of your character that comes forward in the unfolding of your activities.
Yeah. And it becomes part of you, and then it's like, it's quite quite common when people come across integral. I mean, this happened for me when I came across integral theory. I was trying to talk to people in integralese, you know, and it just was not landing with people because of the reasons we know. So as time went on and I was doing these practices and I was sort of metabolizing this integral stuff and making it my own, I could speak about it in just normal language. So when I do my integral meditation workshops, I don't use any integral language at all. I just try and speak directly, simply in the language of our culture. You know, you can also, it's a fine balance, isn't it? Because some people, they don't learn enough and they just dive in and they're just running around like a headless chicken. I mean, I've done that. And then this is another thing I've also done on the other end of the spectrum, is been too cautious and tried to accumulate too much information. So, you know, and then you get this thing of like, too much information kind of paralyzes you from actually acting. So, you know, I've got personal experience from both of those extremes. And I know people, I've got friends that are, you know, both of those sides of the equation.
You know, every interesting British person that I know seems really concerned about bringing ideas forward in a sort of vernacular, common speech kind of way.
Yeah.
It's curious to me, like as a Canadian, I'm always curious about the difference between English and Americans.
Yeah.
Because we're sort of in between there some way. Do you think there's a difference in approach to spirituality or to, you know, the messaging or the form? You know, is there a notably British Isles versus American nuance?
Yeah. So the American stuff I've seen has been what we might say in English was sort of shameless self-promotion. You know, the English tend to not like you know, people putting themselves out there, which, you know, I think actually we've got a lot to learn from the Americans. You know, I love that kind of optimistic, friendly, just, you know, hey, look at me kind of thing that happens in America. The English is so reserved. It's, you know, it's a cliche, but it's true. So I've taken a lot of that from, you know, so much of the media I've consumed over the years has come from America. But I'm also interested in what happens in the UK. And about this 2008 or something like that, I formed a group called Integral Evolutionary Southwest UK, because I was all into all this stuff, but I never met a single person that did this kind of practice. I did when I went to India. I met a few people. I've done 3 trips to India, done quite a lot of travel in Asia. And, you know, I'd meet people out there, but I come back, I live in the middle of nowhere, you know, right out in the sticks. And just was not having conversations with people about this stuff. So I became like Sherlock Holmes and just went on Google and I was just typing in, you know, the area I live in and any reference to integral, Ken Wilber, spiral dynamics, or blah, 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 all that stuff. And I managed to find 45 people that lived in my area. And over the course of a few years, we did some residential, you know, some weekend and sometimes week-long retreats at my house. With like 20 people. I've been working with a psychotherapist, an integral psychotherapist as a client since about 2007 called Gary Hawke. He lives in London. He would come down, you know, do a whole weekend with us doing, you know, integral practice. And we got guys from Enlightened Next to come down and do some, you know, workshops at my house and that. And then I had kids, and I've basically been a dad, you know, pretty much full time since I went to boarding school, and so I was very keen to spend a lot of time with my kids, you know, to create secure attachment and stuff. So then now 6 and 4, so I've got a bit more energy freed up to kind of get back in the game again. You know, I've got a very strong urge to connect with people in a kind of mutual space.
Do you have any connections to the Gurdjieff work?
No. I mean, I've got friends that have done it. You know, I've read books about, you know, about Gurdjieff, and also his autobiography is a really interesting book. I mean, he was a dynamic, fascinating guy.
Yeah, when anyone speaks of Idries Shah, I think of his time with J.G. Bennett, and Bennett as a kind of, you know, a proto-integral teacher in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And then also I think of this body, heart, mind, spirit, because Gurdjieff's stuff is very focused on trying to work with all those different dimensions of ourselves. But one of the questions that comes up in the Gurdjieff work is, how much attention do you put on each of those dimensions, on exercising each of them? And how much do you put on trying to harmonize them or bring them together in a single moment or a single practice? What's your take on that?
Well, so everybody is going to gravitate towards, they're going to everybody's going to, because we're all unique, they're going to specialize in one or two of these areas. So, it's quite natural for if we were to do this body, mind, heart, spirit split, people would specialize maybe in two or one of them, but at least they are practicing to some degree in all of them, and they understand the importance of it. You don't have to be like an Olympic athlete or everything turned up to 11 in every single area of this. But at the same time, I really believe that the age of specialization is behind us, and we need, resilience is kind of a buzzword, at the moment, and looking forwards at all the potential chaotic times that are coming. We need resilient people, and I think about dog breeds in this respect in a kind of funny way, because I've got a Rottweiler. She's a pure breed. I love it a bit. She's just the most gorgeous dog, but she's got health problems because she's bred out of proportion. She's got problems with her joints and stuff, and I've got friends that have got mutts, mongrels that are they're a bit of everything, and they are hardcore dogs. They never get ill, they haven't got any problems, and they're just really, really vigorous creatures. And so I really think another thing I was thinking of, there's this, have you ever seen The Island with Bear Grylls? They drop off people on this uninhabited island. They have to survive. One time they did that. There was this English rugby player, and he was an absolute beast. With like less than 5% body fat, huge muscles, really strong guy, lots of discipline, drive, determination. He got dropped off on this island, and he was like, "Yeah, this is going to be a cinch for me. I'm a tough guy," and he is a tough guy, but his body he's got an elite athlete's body, and he literally, I think he left after one day. He couldn't hack it because he had so much muscle, so little fat. He just needed calories all the time, and they just were living on such small amounts of food. The people that survived to the end were the kind of like people you wouldn't look at them and think, no, that's a tough person. So drawing an analogy with spiritual traditions, you might get somebody who's a sort of Olympic athlete in meditation, but they can't form decent relationships with people, or they've neglected their body so much that they get sick and they can't function properly. And so I really think this kind of diversity is our best chance of carrying these things forwards.
When I was a kid, I remember one of my first personal ideas I ever had about politics was that if the Nazis had thought the super race was the result of interbreeding rather than purity, we would remember them in a very different way. And there's something interesting. There's a combination. I'm wondering about the political dimension of the things you're saying, because there is a tendency of some types of societies and political systems to over specialize, to over optimize for certain things, to fall back towards a purity versus reaching out into a kind of diverse blending structure. What do you think are the social and political analogs to these kind of practices, if any? How do we make what's
okay? Well, an example might be, so up to now we've had the left and the right in politics, haven't we? And there's a whole new type of thing that's arising, with the intellectual dark web, for example. The people that are part of that span the whole political spectrum, and they're having really civilized conversations with each other where they might really disagree about something, but they respect each other, and they're not doing gotcha with each other. But the thing about the intellectual dark web is, if you take that movement as a whole, it's kind of integral. But if you pull out any one member, they're not necessarily. It's interesting, and I think there's something about this mutuality. People doing this stuff together in real time as it happens, rather than this kind of top-down thing. I'm not anti-hierarchies. I mean, if I want to learn something, I'll go to somebody who knows more than I do, and I'll listen. Well, I've been a musician since I was like a kid, and I taught the drums in school for 14 years. So I know a lot about what makes a good student, what makes a good teacher. And it's really helped me be a good student myself, learning about, seeing who were the good students when I was teaching them, and what makes that. I kind of lost where I was going.
Yeah.
The analogs in the wider culture.
Kind of question. Like, coming at it from a musical point of view, it's very easy to see how we would want to exercise body, heart, mind, and spirit, and also try to harmonize them together, try to orchestrate, try to turn it into a band rather than all those parts. But it's very hard at the social level to think, what are those parts and how do they become a symphony rather than something that's degenerating?
So I'm absolutely not advocating some homogenous grey mixing of everything, kind of weak. We kind of did that with the New Age thing, and it was really anemic, had no teeth. So it's this kind of combination of specialization in areas. About my own personal journey, I've has involved a lot of psychedelics over the years. Now that might not be part of another person's journey. I mean, I definitely wouldn't recommend. I do not make a blanket recommendation for psychedelics. For all the reasons we know. So in a way, I've been a bit of a specialist in that area, it's this thing of not having lopsided development and being actually whole. And another thing that some of my YouTube content is about there's this like type of non-duality which is popular, which I think of as like a kind of fake non-duality, where it's very, very heavily emphasizing formless awareness and that recognition. And it's like, okay, well, formless awareness is non-dual, doesn't make any distinctions, all this kind of stuff. And some philosopher described that as a bad infinity, just as like it's a half of the story. The whole other side, if you were to use theistic language, you might call that God. But then there's goddess too, Mother Nature, the whole of the amazing, gorgeous manifest world and the interaction of these two parts of yourself, which you can notice in every moment in your experience. And So I think that that's another thing which I see really popular at the moment, coming together. People have realized we've kind of, gone, lots of teachers, big famous teachers out there have kind of been pushing people down this up and out formlessness route, which is super important. And but kind of downplaying the whole what Samuel Bonder would call waking down aspect. Waking down into your fingertips and your genitals and your relationships, and everything is sacred. This pen, I mean, it's it goes deep in and right out. So I really see those things coming together.
There's a mistake I often see people make conceptually about non-dual and causal states, where there's a tendency to think of certain causal states as non-dual states, right? Because in non-duality, there's always two things being affirmed, and the difference is canceled and affirmed at the same time. Whereas in causal states, there's an infinite, invisible, everlasting, bodiless, qualityless phenomenon of some kind. And I think people point at that one and think that it's non-dual sometimes, as if formlessness were non-duality, when really the non-dualist would be saying, in addition to form, formlessness is also true and is also the nature of form. Yeah. Unless you do that move where they come together, you're not really doing a non-dual practice. You're doing a causal practice and claiming you're a non-dualist.
Yeah. And I think a lot of it is to do with this privileging permanence over temporariness. So, formless awareness is with you day and night, your whole life, never changes, and all the kind of contents of awareness are mutating, evolving, this kaleidoscope of stuff. And it's everything that arises in your consciousness is impermanent, and the bad thing is to try and think that you can make impermanent things permanent. But what they tend to it's a bit like some of these traditions say a stone is good and a flower is bad. Like flower's a temporary thing. Stone lasts, it's around there for like millions of years. And I just don't buy that. I mean, luckily for me, I kind of did go down that track, I did get very much into Ramana Maharshi, Nisargadatta Maharaj, all that stuff. And it was important. It was an important stage for me to go through because I really went deep into that formlessness. But I had this really strong rebound out of it. Oh no, it was. You could, in poetic language, you could describe it was like the goddess kind of crashed back into my life, and it's like, where the fuck have you been? Don't forget me. And so much of the psychedelic stuff that I've done has not been about that causal formlessness. In my 20s, I had some experiences with ketamine of complete nothingness, but being there at the same time. So I'd been in a like a nirvikalpa samadhi state before, but I didn't have the framework to understand it at the time. It was just a state that happened, and it was like, what the hell? I don't really understand what that was, but it was good, and it's made me understand there's actually nothing to fear at the center of life. But most of the other psychedelics, the ayahuasca, DMT, psilocybin, those kind of things, were very much more subtle realm experiences, experiences of the heart. And I feel like a lot of the kind of heart stuff is missing from that formless mysticism. If you think a lot of the Buddhist Vedanta stuff is quite cool, if you compare that with the Sufi burning love, of Rumi and Hafez and Kabir, you know, people like that, or Jesus. I love that image of Jesus with his heart on display. You know, that's kind of, in my opinion, so most of my meditation practice has been in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. And I've found that Tibetan Buddhism is a very complete spiritual tradition, but there's a few things I feel that it's lacking. One is a tradition of psychedelics, because of the geography of Tibet. You know, the Amazons, where all the great psychedelics grow, Central America, all that stuff. Tibet is not a good place for psychedelics. So there's no tradition of that in Tibet, but they've got a very strong subtle practice with the dream yoga and those kind of things. But this psychedelics is different to dreaming, and I've done a lot of lucid dreaming practice, and it's been amazing, and dream analysis and stuff. But it's never been the same as psychedelics. I think they're different experiences. And the other thing is, you know, you have this kind of compassion is the word that's used mainly in the Tibetan Buddhist context. But you know, I'm kind of always been an artistic person, so I'm drawn to that burning love, you know, that you get in more of the sort of Sufi and Christian traditions. So you know, I've had to kind of integrate those types of things into that practice to make it a little bit more whole, as I see it.
When we look back at history, there are a lot of traditions, both of practice and philosophy, that do this move you were talking about, where they privilege impermanence over impermanence. You know, they also privilege mind over heart and body. They privilege the impersonal over the personal. Do you think that's appropriate, you know, to their historical phase? Or do you think that's a sign of an imbalance, a sickness of some kind that we're trying to heal?
Yeah, I think that was just a product of the time. So in, you know, Tibet and India and the Christian desert mystics and, you know, all those people, they went right inside themselves and discovered you know, those elements of consciousness. Whereas in the West, people weren't so much doing that. They were drilling right down into the personality. You know, what makes a healthy personality, a sick personality? What are the ways it gets kinked up and kind of falling in the West, we kind of fell in love with personality, but in the East, people fell in love with, you know, with the transpersonal. And I think that was the East meets West moment that happened, was this kind of like love of the personal meeting the love of the transpersonal. And then we had that kind of like tectonic plates meeting, and all the chaos and mayhem and broken lives and all of that stuff. And then now it's like there's been a more of a mutual appreciation of the East and West, you know, that the East appreciating what the West is bringing, and the West appreciating what the East is bringing. And also, you know, there was that kind of postmodern thing where everything Western was bad. You know, America sucks, Europe sucks, and all of the history of modernity is just a complete nightmare. But once people start to get over that, they realize that there's these amazingly beautiful, unique contributions from the West.
Now, a little while ago, you described the New Age as lacking teeth.
Mm-hmm.
And here's what I would ask is, how important do you think the integration of our aggression is? Right.
Massive. So, I mean, this, for me personally, this is a big thing for me. I, like a lot of English people growing up, anger was not really part of our family dynamic. You know, it's like my parents didn't get angry very much. I didn't get angry very much. When I did, it was sort of frowned upon a bit. Then I went to boarding school where the teachers have enormous scope for punishing you. I mean, you're an absolute captive, and they can take away your Saturday night, your whole weekends, all of that stuff. And so, you know, anger is not welcome. in that school environment. So, but I mean, I took it out. I got into heavy metal. I was in a drummer in a heavy metal band, and I did lots of sports and stuff. And then when I left school, and I also had a lot of nightmares about monsters chasing me, trying to kill me. You know, it's a real big thing, monsters creeping in the room. And then when I started to do psychotherapy with Gary in about 2007, about around that time, you know, we did a lot of work on owning rage and anger. And I went really deep into the big mind process stuff. You know, I subscribed to it was called Zen Eye at the time. It was Genpo Roshi's Zen Center. And I just devoured all the stuff. I did, you know, had some contact with some of the teachers there. And then I went on to do a year-long voice dialogue training with some people that had trained with Hal and Sidra Stone. So, you know, I did a lot of this inhabiting the perspective of anger and speaking and rage and speaking as that. And when you learn to, it's like handling a dangerous snake. You know, it's like if you freak out when you're handling it, the snake freaks out and it all just turns into a mess and you get bitten. You know, but if you kind of you just, you know, you might just touch the snake's tail a bit, or, you know, just gently start handling it, not pushing yourself. You just become familiar with that thing that you've seen as dangerous, you know. And if you watch some of the people who handle snakes on TV, you're like, oh my God, that person's so calm, you know, with that rattlesnake or something. But that everyone can learn to be that competent in their proximity to strong and dangerous emotions. So, and again, another thing is that, you know, one of the sort of positive sides of anger and rage is just raw power, and I think that can translate into this thing of aggressive in a positive sense of aggressively owning your own divinity, for example, you know, in the face of people poo-pooing it or whatever, you know, you know, so you might meet some teacher or master who says, you know, you're just nothing, you know, you're locked in your ego, or all that kind of stuff. And if you haven't got that, is it a chutzpah, right word for it? You know, just the balls, yeah, to say no, you know, that's your opinion. But you know, I'm having these experiences, and you know, one of the great things about learning this first, second, and third person perspective thing is your first person perspective, your first person experience is totally legit. It's true, and it's unassailable. But you know, you have to own that and inhabit it. But then, you know, then you bring that into the second person and third person spheres, and then you can have it challenged and shaped by the other people around you. You know, so that's really important. That was quite a ramble. I did. Yeah. Did I answer your question now?
Yeah, that covers a lot of it. I was struck by the idea of the dreams of being attacked by monsters.
Oh yeah, so that
one of the classic examples in integral theory of why we need psychotherapy in addition to meditation practice is that if you're just watching things as they arise and trying to own them, you might end up watching and owning the wrong things.
Absolutely.
The monster might actually be you, and it might be, you know, aggression you're experiencing, but you think you're experiencing the fear of a retrojected aggression or something like that.
Yeah.
Now, that leads me to a broader question, which is, when you're doing a practice that's accepting or watching or witnessing, how much of that is watching or witnessing whatever you happen to focus on, and how much is looking for specific kinds of things? Because in your work, I can imagine someone sitting down and, you know, if they were a very mental person, they might only see the mind content arising. Should that person, in your view, be checking on the heart and be checking on the sensations as they go through their witnessing, or should they be witnessing just whatever they happen to focus on?
Yeah. Okay. So you asked two questions there. I want to answer both. So the first one was about the monsters. Okay. So when I was in my early 20s, I did a dissertation on Chud. Do you know the Tibetan Buddhist practice, Chud?
Mm-hmm.
It's a tantric visualization practice where you just for people listening, if they haven't heard about it, you sit in a graveyard and you visualize demons coming in from the corners, the jungle and the undergrowth, and devouring your body, chopping it up, and this wrathful goddess comes up and chops your head off and puts it all in a cauldron and stuff like that. And this is one of the reasons why doing psychotherapy stops you meditating for the wrong reasons. So you could be meditating on demons in this chod practice, and actually what you're doing is, to use Ken Wilber's language, is shadow boxing. It's just your own aggression coming back towards you. You're not actually transforming that aggression and owning it and turning it into your own power. It still feels like an external thing. And so with the dreaming stuff, these monsters I was dreaming about seemed to be external things to coming to attack me. And then I had one really powerful dream. It's probably it was a long time, many years ago. I was being chased by, have you seen that kind of crap movie, The Mummy, with The Rock in? They have these skeletons with big scimitar swords, and a couple of those guys were chasing me in this dream. And because I've been doing lucid dreaming practice at the time, I realized, whoa, stop. Why am I running away from this thing? I turned around. It was kind of coming out of a kitchen with a swing door like that with a little window. And it was looking through the window, and it saw me turn around, and suddenly its expression was like, oh shit. And I walked in, wrestled this thing to the ground, and I ate its face. And I felt extraordinarily powerful. I picked up two of these scimitar swords, and I ran down the street going, ah! The reason why I was bringing that up is that you can, and I know this from my own experience of doing meditation practice and then doing psychotherapy, is you can end up meditating. Let's say, you've got this yearning for the sort of oceanic bliss of childhood or something. You can't handle being an adult, a mature adult, and you just crave that infantilism. Your meditation practice can basically turn into a bit of and there's nothing wrong with this. I mean, if you've experienced severe trauma, this would be an important thing to do. It's like a self-soothing thing. It's like sucking on your blankie or something. When you're a kid, you have your little blankie, and it's not about actually enlightenment or awakening in that context. You're doing something different. But then once you do some psychotherapy, you unpack that, you realize what you're doing, and you say, okay, well, I don't want to do that because I actually want to wake up. So does that? Again, I'm just
no, that's on the first part.
On that. So that's part one. So part two, so the witnessing thing. Now, this was my experience, and it seems to be the experience of a lot of people that I've encountered, that the first time you experience this formless witnessing thing, it feels very separate from the rest of life. And I think that's kind of what drives people into this receding, the neti path of not this, not that. I looked on an Advaita Facebook page the other day, and some guy proudly written up there, "The body is a cancer," and I, just looked at it, I thought, wow. But it's that kind of thing of like, shit, this is a really crazy life, is so painful and crazy, and you just go out and out, and sort of separating from all of that stuff, and it can almost feel like your direct experience is split into two bits, where you've got like back here is your empty awareness, and then out there is everything. And you know, that can go on for a certain amount of time, but then after, the more you become, I think you build a relationship with these two sides of yourself, you know, form and emptiness. And like any relationship, it grows and matures and becomes more nuanced. And you know, the more you do that, you discover that actually formless awareness doesn't have a simple location, and it's like it's actually everywhere, you know, and mixed in with the form. It's not like two things meeting like that. They are, it's like one never turns into the other, but they kind of like it penetrate each other. But you know, you can take that as a whole and it is one thing. I remember I said to fairly recently, I was just thinking, like, what's the subjectivity of objectivity? And it was almost like a koan. It just like went, mine collapsed, and you know, you do get, well, this is the subjectivity of objectivity. But if you bring it down one level, you've got the subjectivity and objectivity, and God and goddess dancing, and they have this beautiful relationship. So, I mean, what I'm describing is, you know, it starts out with this feeling of quite a severe separation, a detachment, but then as that matures, and, you know, like a whiskey, you know, you leave a whiskey for 50 years or something, it tastes really good, you know, or 25 or 16 years. But, you know, you have a whiskey that's too young, it's just the flavors are not integrated. So, you know, in terms of instructing people, so you were asking about instructing people to do this formless witnessing thing correctly without, you know, ending up down some of these dead ends.
It seems to me there's a danger in two different directions here. On the one hand, there's a danger of not being able to be really present and open and receptive because you're trying to apply a deliberate focusing. But on the other hand, if you just relate to whatever's coming up, you might only relate to the kinds of things that you typically focus on and miss whole other ranges of experience.
Okay. Yeah. So this is where effortless comes in, effortlessness. So, you know, when you start out meditating, you're putting effort in, and what you're using is not necessarily what I would call awareness. You're using attention, which I kind of distinguish attention from awareness. So attention's got a bit of effort in, and you focus on things, and it's an important thing to do. So when I'm teaching my integral meditation workshops, I do a first person practice, which is more to do with this formless awareness stuff. Second person practice, which is more of a, you know, visualization, deity yoga kind of thing. And then a third person practice, which is a body based thing where you're actually intentionally focusing on your breath, using your attention. So, you know, I don't want to say attention is bad, awareness is good, but they're different things. So awareness, there's awareness. So I'm going to use God and goddess here. Okay, so awareness, I'm going to call God, loves the goddess, Mother Nature, form, so much on her own terms that he effortlessly welcomes anything that arises. And you know, Adi Dar used to talk about the self-contraction, and awareness is utterly uncontracted. There's no awareness effortlessly receives any information that comes in through your senses. There's no filter there. And so when you meditate and you're kind of going into this formless awareness, this witnessing thing, if you notice you're trying to manipulate your experience, you're out of it. There's no impulse at all to manipulate the moment. So the moment is delivered on its own terms. The goddess presents herself on her own terms. And there's such a love between awareness and form that there's no impulse to contract around that. And I'm not saying contraction is a bad thing. Having a personality, that's a separate thing. And I think this is where the big mind process and voice dialogue is really, really handy for meditation, because you develop the capacity to go deep into one of these perspectives, never losing sight of the other perspectives. So it's like you can go, it's almost like playing a game and really playing that game. So you go deep, 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 deep into that formless witnessing awareness. But you know that you're going to come out of it, and then there's all this other stuff, which is true as well. Like your personality, beautiful, true. Goddess, form, Mother Nature, true and beautiful. And it kind of gives you that fluidity to move around these perspectives and feel their unique, powerful truths, but not get stuck in them. But once you really get this effortless thing, suddenly it's not about sitting in meditation, doing your witnessing. Awareness, simple awareness is always like that. It's the essence of everybody's subjectivity all the time. And you can just notice any time your awareness is not putting things out. My brother's an artist, he's a painter. And we were having a spliff one night, smoking a joint. And he said, show me something and I'll see it. And it just, in that moment, made us both laugh, because there's a real teaching in that, So does that answer?
It touches on some of it. There's another point in there somewhere. Let me ask it sort of a different way. If somebody comes to you and they have a particular emphasis on, say, emotion and emotional practices, is that what they should work with? Should they privilege that because that's the kind of person they are? Or is that person specifically in need of privileging physical and mental practices in order to balance that out? Like, how much do we work with just what comes up for us?
Yeah.
And how much do we deliberately try to balance it out?
Yeah. So everything is connected. And so your meditation practice develops your ability to introspect. And when you have a greater capacity for introspection, then your psychotherapy is more effective, because you can actually see the stuff that your therapist is trying to guide you towards. But psychotherapy is a thing that it's all about relationship with another guide. Psychotherapy you can do to a limited extent yourself, and I think psilocybin and mushrooms, for example, are amazing psychotherapists. And it's a bit of a first person experience of it, but really where psychotherapy becomes most effective is when you work with another person, because they are outside of your subjective space. And when you have a friend and they're having some trouble, and you can see plain as day what they need to do, because you're on the outside of it. They're stuck in it, and it's so much easier to see things from the outside. So sitting in meditation is not going to sort out your psychological needs. You'll be more aware of the contents of your mind, your emotions, physical sensations, where feelings go around your body, but it's never going to do what psychotherapy can do. And that is something that's a truth that's not been digested fully by meditation traditions. They've tended to kind of, do you have this expression in America, poo-poo?
Yeah.
Or is it British? Yeah. Just poo-poo psychotherapy and the personality. They're like, that's trash, waste of time. Psychotherapy just reinforces your ego, and I really think that's a mistake.
That's an interesting distinction between, the things that can only be clarified by working with someone or something outside yourself, and the things that can be clarified by working inside yourself. And in regards to psychedelics, that's a bit of an ambiguous question, because obviously a lot of psychedelic experience is an amplification of what was already going on inside us.
Yeah.
But there is also this objective element. And so
Yeah.
I would ask a question like this, which is,
Well,
you know,
and a second person.
does the mushroom have a message for us? Is something coming in from the outside?
Yeah. Okay. I was hoping we were going to talk about this, because so many people have made complete fools of themselves, saying, "Oh, I've got this message through from the psychedelic." Like, I don't know whether you know Terence McKenna and his work on the novelty wave and all that stuff. It was basically complete bullshit, you know, and he spent all this time working on this stuff. And you know, there was a lot of this 2012 stuff, you know, in the psychedelics world, you know, and that was what 2012 was 8 years ago. You know, I haven't seen this great, you know, the aliens haven't landed and stuff. So I really think drawing detailed conclusions about the nature of reality and how it functions and stuff like that is quite dodgy on psychedelics. The main thing I've learned from them is how to energetically work with life and death, and fear, how to kind of trust our ability to morph into just the most bizarre forms without any normal reference points and still be okay and come back out of it. You know, it's given me a lot of trust in life, myself, other people, and made me far less. I'm still scared of dying, but I do not have that kind of existentialist, you know, manic fear of it, and a lot of that I put down to ayahuasca, psychedelics. But what I want to say is there's a second person aspect to psychedelics, particularly things that have DMT in them, like DMT and ayahuasca. The first time I tried ayahuasca, I was absolutely shocked. I was, you know, I studied shamanism at university, and you know, for years I was like always wanting to meet spirits and deities and all that stuff. You know, I was really looking for that kind of other, that totally alien other thing, and never quite happened for me. And then when I tried ayahuasca for the first time a long time ago, it was unmistakably I was meeting some intelligent entity, which was just enormously beyond the limits of my personality, and interestingly had a very distinctly feminine flavor. And I had never heard, and afterwards I was like, it's like really feminine. And they were like, yeah, ayahuasca's called Panchamama, the grandmother, and stuff like that. And then when I tried DMT, you know, smoking DMT, you just go to this hyperspace world, and it's just filled with living creatures that are really interested in you. It's absolutely shocking, and it's really consistently reported by other people. So what it is, whether it's just you interacting with a part of yourself, I don't know. I mean, I don't really like to draw those kind of ontological conclusions, is that the right word, about those sort of things, or epistem, I don't know, whatever. I'm not so good with those words.
Ontological, if you think it really exists.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, so, you know, but the subjective experience is that you are actually meeting other entities which are totally amazing and bizarre, and I think that is a useful experience, because if you've had a very powerful experience of first person divinity, I've met people like this, and I've had experiences of it like myself, and I've you know, had friends who have been schizophrenic and have believed they're the Messiah. You can have, if you have a very, very strong first person experience, you can get this Messiah complex thing going. That can really be helped and ameliorated by drinking ayahuasca, for example, and meeting something which is so much bigger than you, but so caring and loving too. It's like ayahuasca is enormous, but it's so loving, and can be really rough with you, but it always comes from a place of love, and it's extremely humbling. It really puts people on their knees. So I think, it's one of the things that kind of thing, that's what the Amazon jungle brings to, say, Tibetan Buddhism or Vedanta Hinduism or something like that.
Yeah, it seems to me that a new kind of shamanism, a trans rather than a pre-shamanism, has to really cultivate the skill of looking for the more abstract or the more general lessons that come from those second person type communications. Like you were talking about McKenna, obviously 2012 was not what he speculated it would be. However, the more general idea that there could be an accelerating convergence of novelty and habit over the course of time and history, that's very interesting, right?
Yeah, so I'm open to that, but he made a computer program, actual software. So
this is where it seems like people go astray in terms of the plant message, is they take the superficial content too seriously rather than looking at the more general underlying pattern it's trying to describe.
Yeah, and I honestly think that comes with maturity. So in the early days, for me, it was all about the big experiences and the messages and the visuals and all that stuff. But as time's gone on, I'm not so interested in that stuff. It's like I just have such trust in the medicines themselves.
Do you think that they are inherently integrative or focused just on one aspect? Because there's a thing in integral theory where you might say of shamanism, it was great for the stage it was at, or it's just a form of nature mysticism, or all these substances do is focus you on the subtle dimension. But you could also make the argument that it's actually much more advanced than that it brings together all your dimensions and draws you forward into some kind of ecologically and personally resilient emergence.
Yeah, I think that integral view is pompous bullshit. And psychedelics are a neutral tool that you can plug psychedelics into any worldview. And I'm living proof of that. I mean, if I started with LSD when I was 14, and so I've kind of gone through traditionalism there, through modernity and post-modernity and whatever integral thing that's happening for me these days, and it has really changed for me. And talking about integration, in my early 20s, I went hell for leather with psychedelics, and I actually disintegrated myself. I was right on the verge of insanity. The TV and radio were talking to me, for example, and I recognized the signs. I was like, oh my God. Luckily, I moved out of London and that kind of context, milieu of that whole thing. And, I got away with it by the skin of my teeth. But I was utterly disintegrated by taking too many psychedelics crammed in too short a period. So there's no space for integration there. So, as I developed more of a mature practice with it, I left far more time between taking psychedelics. And in the psychedelics world, integration's the real buzzword. It's like you see on all the forums, it's like therapists doing the integration work. You do your psychedelics and then you do 6 integration sessions afterwards with the therapist and all that kind of thing. And I think the integration, what people are looking for is an integral life practice type thing, where you're working with body, heart, mind, and spirit. That is the integration there. And it's a long-term thing. I do want to just say, you know, because I know this is a public thing. I don't supply psychedelics. I've never even given anybody any psychedelics. You know, I'm not taking psychedelics all the time, and I don't have an enormous stash of psychedelics in my house, you know, just in case anyone like calls me up and says,
dealer. That's
can you hook me up? No, for me, it's always been a very personal, private thing, you know. So and I do not push it onto other people, because I've got, well, I nearly went crazy myself, and I've got several friends who ended up in you know, hospitals for people with mental illness.
So there's
even some suicides too. So, you know, it's no joke.
The maturation that's needed to handle the dangers of these substances is one thing, but
yeah,
what else would you think distinguishes, you know, a trans shamanism from a pre-shamanism? Right? What are the, like, some of it may be really archaic and small, and some of it might be exactly what our civilization needs right now.
Yeah. So I think one of the best phrases I've heard to encapsulate it is, together we are shaman. And it's this thing of people coming together and doing this stuff in a space of mutuality, rather than, I mean, there are so many stories. I've worked with a few shamans before, and you know, I've never had that bad an experience, but there are so many horror stories of people, shamans basically being like gurus, you know, and just ruining people's lives with their complete rubbish. And it's you know, the shaman can't be too cocky, because it's about the substance and the person taking it. And the shaman is the one who knows what's an effective setting for that encounter, you know, knows when to play whatever type of music, or when to turn the lights off, or when to turn the lights on, when to get people up to dance or whatever. You know, and that's, it's like a humble service kind of thing, you know. And I'm not a shaman myself. I've never been interested in being a shaman. So I think, you know, a lot, it ties in with a lot of this stuff. We're entering the age of mutuality, you know, peer working together, and it's all because of the internet. You know, I don't know how old you are, but how old are you?
However long it's been since 76.
76. I was born in 1978. So we're about the same age. You and I have seen life before the internet and life after the internet, you know, and pretty much lived about an equal amount of time before and after. You know, it really feels like the dark ages. And before the internet, when I say dark ages, I mean lack of illumination, lack of knowledge, you know, lack of transparency. So before that time, you know, you had this kind of siloing, and spiritual traditions could just go unchallenged for, you know, hundreds of thousands of years, saying, you know, our path is the best, everything else is rubbish, and we were just supposed to take their word for it. But now with the internet and stuff, it's all been pushed together. And I draw an analogy between this and the Ultimate Fighting Championships, UFC, with mixed martial arts. So you know, back in the day, it was really common for, you know, the karate people to say, my style is better than yours. And, you know, there's all this kind of bravado thing, but never actually bringing that into the arena of combat and testing it out. And then 1993, I think, was the first Ultimate Fighting Championships, where all these different martial arts traditions came and fought in the ring, on TV, in front of the whole world. And people were totally humiliated. You know, traditions that thought they were unassailable were just mauled by other traditions. And then they kind of over the years, they've worked it out. And, you know, what now you have is mixed martial arts, which is kind of combination of striking martial arts, of punching and kicking, and then wrestling, grappling, jiu-jitsu, all of that stuff. And the kind of warriors, or the, you know, the the martial artists in that context are extremely effective fighters. If you took them back in time to like the Shaolin Temple or something, they would undoubtedly be kicking ass. So I see the same thing happening with the spiritual traditions, that you know, it's all hot air until you actually bring it into the commons, you know, bring it out of that kind of isolation, bring it out into this we space, the commons, this space of mutuality, and let's test it out with other people. We've got the internet, we've got instant communication. You don't have to wait for someone to publish a book. You know, you can talk to people. You don't have to make do with reading a book about something. You can actually find the person, send them an email, contact them, phone them up. You know, it's like, I've spoken to some of the integral people. I've just sent them emails and had conversations. You know, before that, I never wrote a letter to someone I read a book by, you know. So I think a mature shamanism is a shamanism that's encountered modernity and science, and I think the younger people, you know, 20, about that age now, are really cynical, skeptical. You know, they've got acidic minds. They do not like bullshit. They're quite, you know, and I think that kind of discernment, that critical thinking, you know, you think the popularity of people like Sam Harris and Steven Pinker and people like that, you know, they teach people really good critical thinking, you know, logic, reasoning, that kind of stuff. You kind of bring it to encounter that, then goes beyond. I mean, post-modernity is kind of a bit weird with psychedelics. I mean, you know, when I was at university, I was totally into that. I really drank the Kool-Aid and became a total hippie, and you know, the psychedelics were just not quite as effective in that space. But as soon as I grasped this integral stuff, it really started to take off. And I think psychedelics plugged into an integral operating system, that is a very powerful force. And it's, you know, shamans are specialists. They know some of these technologies that, you know, novices wouldn't know, but they have to know their place, really. I feel, just like I really think the age of gurus is over. You know, you going to one individual and saying, tell me everything I should do about my whole life, that it's just it doesn't stand up to scrutiny anymore, because we all know all the horror stories. But at the same time, you know, I'm really in favor of seeking experts, getting their knowledge, but you know, so this would apply to the shaman too. An example would be, I went to something and some satsang with a guru, and this lady was asking him about what she should do, like, for her parenting. And this guy was a celibate. He didn't have any kids, and he was giving her advice on how to be a parent, and he knew nothing about parenting, and his advice was really bad. But I was there to get meditation instruction from this guy, you know, awakening instruction. When he started talking about parenting, I was just like, blah, 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 blah. Yeah. So I hope that kind of answered your question.
I don't even remember what the question was.
Well, it was, well, you know, what's the future of shamanism? The question was basically that.
I do like that mature shamanism is something like mixed spiritual arts, and that it's got to have this negative feedback element to it. It seems like a lot of the traditions, spiritually or physically, but also our political and economic leaders, you know, they can destroy things and there's no negative feedback, so they just do it again. They continue to thrive even though they're screwing up. There's no evolutionary mechanism there.
Yeah, and it's the teachers that keep coming back like a bad rash, you know. And I like the image of Hogwarts. So in Hogwarts, Dumbledore is like the integral shaman, you know, the integrated wizard, and you have all of these different teachers there. You know, the dark arts teacher, the psychic lady, you know, Hagrid with his beasts, and all of these, you know, and the students go to learn these specific skills from all of these teachers, but they're not going to any of these teachers for the whole picture. Dumbledore's the only person that's holding that key in that kind of mythological scheme, and Dumbledore is where the students are heading. They want to be Dumbledore, and these other teachers are facilitators towards that. You know, I kind of like that image.
Yeah, it sounds like an apt description of what has to go on inside us as well. Now,
Yeah,
I guess we're
yeah. Oh,
probably
sure. Well,
coming.
yeah. Well, it's that, and again, that's what voice dialogue does for you. The big mind process. It teaches you to inhabit these unique perspectives inside yourself and feel their own unique truths and value. Yeah.
Do you think like going into each of those parts on its own terms and then coming out and going in and coming out, that over time that just automatically harmonizes and coordinates all of them toward an integration? Or do you think there needs to be an additional kind of deliberate practice of trying to bring them all together, you know, in single events and in single moments, trying to do all of them at once as best you can?
Yeah. Well, we're all doing it all at once anyway. And you can, you know, whether that's a conscious thing or not, you know, is a difference. In voice dialogue, you have what they call the aware ego, which is the sort of, you know, HQ for all of this stuff. And my personal view on that kind of, you know, the self that is the HQ is that one I can't name, you know, and I trust the integrating force of nature and the psyche. And in terms of the practices, if you do these practices over years, they become part of who you are, just naturally. You don't have to force it. So, you know, when I first started doing an integral life practice in 2007, I mean, I'd been doing a lot of these practices for a long time before, but there were a few, when I encountered that integral life practice schema, there were a few things that were missing. Like I hadn't been doing psychotherapy, for example, so I started to plug that in and, you know, things like that. And when I first started doing, you know, weightlifting and psychotherapy, meditation in first, second, and third person, and you know, learning the integral map and evolutionary stuff and the story of the universe, you know, Brian Swim, all that kind of stuff. It was like, it felt a bit of a mess, really. and it felt like they were all kind of like jostling up against each other. But as time went on, it all smoothed out and just became part of who I am. So it's like learning a musical instrument. You know, have you ever do you play a musical instrument?
Mm-hmm.
What do you play?
Flute.
The flute. Okay. So when you if you can remember when you first played a flute, it was like everything was separate on it. A bit like driving a car. You know, you're just performing all these separate look in the mirror, use the clutch, the gears on the flute. It's like the scales and using the right fingers. Everything feels separate and not integrated. That's the experience of being a novice in something. But mastery, you know, I really enjoyed that book by George Leonard called Mastery. You know, that's about doing long-term practice. And now when you pick up a flute, you're just, you know, or you get in the car and it's just part of your body. You know, it's this prosthesis. And, you know, that's what happens with practice. And I think you just have to trust that practice, keep doing your practice, be disciplined about it. And over time, it just all blends in. That's been my experience of it.
I have a great deal of respect for blending, hybridization, mongrelization. All these concepts to me seem to be at the center of what thinking about spirituality needs to be going forward. But what else should we talk about? If it was up to you.
Yeah, well, on that note, so one of the critiques of digging lots of holes, yeah, is that you dig lots of shallow holes and you don't dig any deep ones. But what that doesn't take into account is the evolutionary process. So what is a shallow hole now was a deep hole in the past. And I experienced the truth of this when I was a drum kit teacher in school. The kids I was teaching were so much better than when I was at school and I was a kid, because of loads of factors. I mean, maybe more for genetic fields, with Rupert Sheldrake's stuff, or, just the internet. So when I was at school, we had one drum video that we would pass around the school. Like the teacher just did military drumming, and I wasn't interested in that. I wanted to do heavy metal stuff, and so I just had to learn through listening to CDs and watching other my friends play. But the kids now have so many resources for learning. It's like they can watch all their favorite drummers on YouTube. They can buy all these books with the drum notes, music annotated for all their favorite albums, all that stuff. And I was utterly humbled by how amazing some of my, a lot of my students were compared to my age category when we were that age. And I really think that if you take an evolutionary view seriously, that comes into play, and that's kind of a counter argument to this thing of like, you're just the cafeteria, spiritual cafeteria type of thing. But and the other thing I would say against that is that I'm in favor of long-term practice, and it's not the kind of weekend seminar effect. It's so even though you're doing practices in lots of areas, you've got a disciplined long-term approach. Like I want to be doing strength training until I'm 100, 90. I want to die doing a push-up. I really, seriously, it's and all that stuff. So I think that's some of the counter arguments to that.
Yeah, I'm not too worried about the dangers of the spiritual cafeteria and the eclectic approach, because everybody's always working with a set of practices, no matter what their tradition is. It involves some things they're doing, and they only have a certain amount of time. And hopefully they've picked out the practices or the versions of the practices that correspond to themselves and what they're working on. Because it's not, I think the distinction is whether a person is just sort of randomly receiving and trying a little bit of what other people are offering them, or whether they're actively engaged in figuring out which bits of which things correspond to their needs and their unfolding.
Yeah. It would be a bit like walking into a cafeteria, a spiritual cafeteria, and you've got some practices of like, you've got a range of body practices, a range of heart practices, psychotherapy, relationship work, all that kind of thing. A range of mind practices, theories. What theories are on offer, and then different spiritual practices. And we're all unique. You walk into that cafeteria and you kind of energetically feel around, and you feel the warm spots. It's like, okay, so that one, in the physical practice, hatha yoga, that's what I want to do. That makes sense for me. It resonates with me as an individual. In the heart space, what kind of psychotherapy do I want? It's like quite a physical person, maybe some kind of body-based psychotherapy, the theory stuff. I really, the integral stuff's cool, but, I'm more drawn to metamodernism or something like that, and then spiritual thing, your thing might be prayer or something, so and then another person walks in, they pick out Dzogchen, integral theory, weightlifting, and Gestalt therapy or something like that, and those two individuals have covered the essential range, but their practices are totally unique and look different.
Absolutely. And you can definitely make a complaint that sometimes people are too much of a spiritual consumer or a spiritual dilettante, and they just get excited about each new thing and do a little bit of it and then move on to the next exciting thing. That's a legitimate complaint. But at the same time, everybody's path is their path. It's one path, right? Yeah. My practice is my practice, and whatever I've selected from those sets of techniques, that's my one path. I'm not switching paths if I'm doing it that way. I'm sticking to my one path, which includes a bunch of things.
And that's a legitimate critique. And I think Chogyam Trungpa's book, Spiritual Materialism, is a fantastic book to read, to kind of make you aware of that kind of thing. But there's nothing wrong with experimenting and trying something, and it's not a good fit. You let it go. So, that's, if any great entrepreneur, you talk to them and they say the secret to being a great entrepreneur is, I have failed 90% of the time. I've started this company, it didn't work. That company, this idea I thought was great, but it turned out to be rubbish. And you don't see all those dead ends. You just see the person where they are. And if I take my own physical practice, so when I came across integral life practice, I took up weightlifting, like Ken Wilber and Sean Phillips and that lot. And I was using free weights at home. I really enjoyed that for a while, and I was eating 12 eggs a day and having protein shakes and eating 6 meals a day and obsessing about the recommendations that I was getting about like the time of day to exercise and how soon you exercise after you've eaten your food. And I mean, God, it all of a sudden I was like, this is unsustainable. I can't keep this up. Some people do. Some people love all of that thing, but that was not for me. And I gravitated more towards body weight strength training. And the person I really was drawn to was a guy called Steve Maxwell. So the stuff I do is basically like being a monkey, being a kid, body weight stuff. I don't use weights, and that was a far better fit for me. But I had to go through that kind of like uncomfortable phase. It's like it's been an adolescent or something, going through childhood, being an adolescent, and then a more mature adult. And adolescence is a very uncomfortable phase, and you have that when you do any practice. You have these uncomfortable phases that it's like, do I need to change direction here? And I don't think there's any shame in changing the direction.
You are generally pretty positive about the internet in everything you said. Yeah. So obviously there's this access to data component, and there's this an amplification of the experience of mutuality and contact compared to previous mediums of communication. But it also seems like there's some real dangers in terms of polarization and the deluge of false information and simply being overwhelmed by information and not knowing what to do with it. So how do you balance those out in your own mind?
Yeah, well, you find people you trust and you accept the way they've edited the information out there. So, so it's like they become a kind of funnel through which, they've spent their time, maybe their whole, life kind of sifting through all of this stuff, and they've kind of funneled it down into something, and you can receive that transmission. And you can find lots of people like that. There's loads of people I admire. And I go to whatever their media outlet is, and I say, this is quality stuff. This person's ordering the chaos out there, and all the trolling and polarization. I mean, I hate that stuff. I mean, politically, I'm kind of center left or something. I mean, in a way, I'm kind of all over the place, and I actually feel a real pain in my chest when I'm on Facebook and I'm reading, I'm seeing the political polarization going on, and people's, honestly, in simple terms, it's just a lack of love for other people, I mean, I live with my parents. We have a house. It's been in our family for 8 generations. So my parents live there. I live here with my family, and my brother and his family live here. There's 10 of us in the house. My dad is really conservative. He's kind of like a Homo economicus type of guy, and I fucking love him. I really love him. And it's so good for me to spend. I see him every day, and to spend time with someone who goes to church. He's part of the Conservative Party. Run a sort of modernist company, and but I love him. He's a good man. He really is. And so I'm in a kind of physical space where different worldviews are come together. And I run a little bit of a community of people here. Have people living on our land. When I say run it, I mean like logistically, just I'm not like the boss type of thing. It's and a lot of people come in with different worldviews and political opinions and stuff. But I really try and hold the space where that's all okay, and through everybody being actually in this physical same space, they learn and they spend time together, months together or years. They actually learn to really respect each other because they spend time with the other politically and realize that person's not a monster.
Now, do you think that has to happen in real life in an embodied process?
No.
Or do you think it can happen in the virtual environment as well?
So I think the intellectual dark web are a good example of an online phenomenon of people from very different political persuasions. You've got Douglas Murray, who's kind of associated with it, but he's conservative. Then you've got the Weinsteins, Brett and Eric. They're like hardcore liberals, and they're all over the place. Sam Harris is, he's sort of a bit associated with it, I suppose. People like that. They're sort of a bit in the centre, and they're an example of people getting on with each other, even if they strongly disagree about, politics and stuff.
What's the key in order to get on with somebody who has strong differences to you? Is it just repeated exposure? It's just repetition and respect, or what is it?
So much of it is just plain old ignorance. And by that, I mean not exposing yourself to real people on the opposite side of the aisle. And there was this really powerful, do you know Darren Brown?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he's an English hypnotist, kind of magician guy. He did a really powerful episode where he got this guy who was kind of, a bit of a white supremacist type. And he got him to eventually take a bullet. It was fake. He didn't realize it, but it was fake. He took a bullet for a Mexican guy. And, before that, he was like, he was saying the most horrible things about Mexicans. And Darren Brown did some of these things with him. One of which was, so one of the practices that I really like to do in my meditation workshops to do with the second person practice is to do gazing. You know, that practice where you just sit and you make extended eye contact with a person. And that's all you do. You just sit, you just look in someone's eyes, and it's very, very simple, but it's extremely powerful. And he did something like one of the things that Darren Brown got these guys to do was to just sit and look at each other. And this like white supremacist kind of guy was just in floods of tears looking at this Mexican guy, you know, and he felt like he loved him. It was amazing. And it was just an actual encounter, you know, and there's the story of, he's a black American guy. I can't remember his name, but he was making friends with neo-Nazis. Have you heard of that guy?
Yeah, vaguely. I don't know his name though.
It's just amazing. You know, he has become really, really close friends with people who were neo-Nazis just by getting to, like, approaching them, getting to know them, you know, in person. And, you know, the siloing effect is... it's
a tough thing online, though, because it takes time and energy to get to know somebody and have them become real for you.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're online, no matter how many times you've done that, you're still going to be dealing with way more people that you haven't had the opportunity to real eyes in your own life.
Hey, user 1257, fuck you. Yeah. I think, you know, it's probably to do with the speeding up thing. You know, things are just too fast and it's too shallow. And I really like...
Do we make an effort to slow it down, or do we just accept that there's going to be a difference between the things we work on, slow down, and that there is a space for, you know, superficial, hyper-fast reactivity? It just can't dominate.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I love that kind of internet junk food too. I'm not going to deny, you know, I enjoy all of that stuff partly, but you know, one of the things we can do is make that subject an object in our awareness. So there's a lot of studies going on into the negative effects of this polarization, siloing, echo chamber thing going on the internet. It's becoming a thing. Like when we first all started using these tools, social media, that these concepts were not part of the conversation. We were in it. It wasn't an object we could actually look at. It wasn't a thing. I love that expression, making something a thing. It's so descriptive of taking something out of the first person into the third person and actually looking at it. And it's like we're all looking at this phenomenon and saying, is this good or is it bad? You know, let's honestly look at it. And some really sane people with a big platform, you know, popular people are saying, this is bad. You know, and so it's also new. And it keeps changing so fast. It's like by the time you've adapted to one set of things, it's the whole other thing comes along. And but I think it's slightly unrelated, but I think getting out of the advertising model for the internet is going to be a big thing for good, because it just funnels people down these routes. You know, if you actually pay a bit of money, then you get the content you want, really. You know, it's more that kind of Netflix model. So I think probably paying small amounts of money to use the internet to filter out some of this shit could be a good thing.
Yeah. There's got to be some kind of investment and a tweaking toward exclusivity, toward getting what you actually want and making a qualitative distinction.
Yeah.
You know, whether that's a payment model or there's some other model, you can't really do it unless we're filtering to some degree.
You see it on Facebook groups and Facebook pages where you have admins and moderators. They try to create a special ecosystem there, you know, and if people are not if they're not following the rules that have been described, on that page, then they get removed. So that's one answer to it. But it does create a bit more siloing.
It's tricky, the moderation thing, because you have to have the temperament for it, and it takes time to moderate. And I used to be one of the moderators on the Integral Life Forum,
Mm-hmm.
and there's always a reluctance among people who are better at integrating and recognizing different kinds of perspectives, right? People who are more empathic and more able to understand where people are coming from and have a broader vision of what can be included. It's often very difficult for a couple of those people to decide to throw somebody out.
Yeah. Well, that is where it comes back to owning and integrating your own rage and anger, and because one of the things you learn through, I was really into Robert Augustus Masters' work around anger. That when you own, and Genpo Roshi with the big mind process, when you actually inhabit your own anger, it matures and transforms into just raw power. Not but power is a neutral thing, not like power for dominating people, but power for decisiveness, for taking action, and bring in some of that. These are the rules, and this is a place where these rules apply. It's a little universe with its own set of fundamental laws. If you're going to try and break those laws, then you can't be part of this universe. It's as simple as that. And but then most of the time it's easy to see when people are inside the rules or outside the rules. But you do get these occasions where people are right on the edge. Those are always difficult, and you're going to make mistakes, but you can't live a life where you're making perfect decisions all the time. You're going to kick out people that shouldn't have been kicked out. You're going to let people stay that shouldn't be stayed. But they can always appeal, and then you can let them back in. And if you leave in the wrong person, other people will start talking. It's about listening to other people. Being a good listener. That's almost one of the key things I see in the future. Particularly with the internet and with everything. It's about being a good student of life. Is so much about just listening. I know I've been talking so much on this podcast. So once I get going, I don't stop. But I have got the ability to listen to, and to listen to other people and let it in. Let this kind of listening is you and it's to do meditation too. You're saying about this witnessing thing, or you're letting things in. Let things come in and let them change you. It's an amazing thing. For me, my life's always been about transformation, evolution, maturity, growing up, growing down, all of that stuff. And that's happened by letting new novel things come into my life, my energetic sphere, and change me. It's about having a growth mindset, because so many Peter's Robert Keegan's thing of resistant to change, or whatever, I think that was his saying, isn't it? That so many people, they just want to put out, but then they're not in that kind of receiving mode either. At the same time, you can do both. Sometimes you put out, sometimes you receive.
How much of that do you think is, just a mindset, and how much of it do you think is actually anchored in the body? The body is just tensed up and isn't letting anything come in.
Yeah. Well, you know how your body reflects your soul, so to speak. You could language it that way. And I don't mean someone with a beautiful body's got a beautiful soul, 6-pack abs, long, luscious blonde hair. I'm talking about how somebody inhabits their body. It's happened to me with quite a lot of teachers that I've actually seen in person. So, you know, I might have read their books, thought they were a certain way. Then when I've seen them actually physically present and seen how they inhabit their body, sometimes people I've been really impressed. I'm like, wow, this has just put my interpretation of this person up. But sometimes I've seen people, you know, like a lot of Tibetan Buddhist masters, you know, I've seen them in the person and I've been like, yeesh, you know, the way this person is in their body is just, there's something off there. You know, so one of the practices probably that you could take into internet use is, if you find yourself, your shoulders hunching, your jaws tensioning, all that stuff, all of that, your body and mind is all connected. You know, if you're doing this, you're going to start fighting, scrapping with people, you know, online. But if you just soften up, you know, softening your belly, you know, it's like, that's an area, that the belly is an area which we're in a funny place with now in society, in our culture, because a soft belly is a very vulnerable thing. You know, like when a dog, when they submit, you know, they come up, when they don't want to mess with you, they come up, they lie back and they expose their belly and it's all soft and you rub it. And we live in the era of, you know, 5% body fat, 6-pack abs, you know, 1,000 crunches before breakfast, all of that stuff. And it's that's like a physical representation of the psyche of our society in a way, you know, that kind of hard muscle thing. I'm into muscle, you know, I've got strong abdomen, but I do like to just let my belly be soft. You know, when I'm here, I've been a bit nervous doing this podcast with you, but I've been consciously letting my body just sink into the chair and be relaxed. That's because I know that everything else will follow suit there, you know, and my awareness is always open and relaxed. And that is just, it's always with me. And it's such a blessing to have that relaxation and openness in the moment. You know, because you can experience fear and nervousness, and it's okay. You know, it's like, that's welcome. It's beautiful. There's, you know, there's nothing wrong with fear and feeling uncomfortable and weird and like you're a complete dickhead and all that stuff. It's great. It's beautiful. That's the flower, you know.
This, the last 15 minutes, by far my favorite part of our chat so far. I'm having a really nice time, but I'm also painfully aware there's only so much of a video we can expect people to watch. So we should bring it to an end.
I've been watching your content that you and Bruce have been putting out, and it's quality, man. You know, I've listened to like full length episodes, particularly the Fire from Heaven stuff about transmission. It's been
that's good. Been a really nice series. I've had a lot of fun doing that one.
Yeah.
This is what I like to end with is, what should I ask the next person? What would you want to know from the next person I talk to?
I like it when people are real. You know, they show themselves, like their personal self. They don't try and, you know, put on an act or try and be something they're not, perform, all of that kind of thing. I really like authenticity. You know, that's what I'd want to know is how, you know, how do people maintain their authenticity in this celebrity world we live in, where anyone can make a TV channel. You make your podcast, you make your own radio channel, you make your own TV channel, you got your Instagram thing, which is like some fashion magazine, that you put up all your best shots and all that. Facebook, I like the Facebook posts when people say, I don't talk about this much, but for the last 6 months I've hardly been able to get out of bed, because I've been so depressed, and I not in the kind of poor me way, but just like, this is real, rather than, hey, we took the kids up to this castle, and then we went to a mountain, and then we went on a boat ride, and we caught a shark, and and then I drank like 12 beers and got fucked up, and it was amazing. I don't know if you noticed, my kids watch a lot of YouTubers, and they have this voice where they're just shouting like they just they drank too much coffee and they're on amphetamines, and it's so goddamn funny. Look, that's so crazy. Look at that, my car's got spray paint on it. I'm gonna break my computer. Yeah, look, buy another one. It's just that is the insanity of this moment we live in, and it's why this podcast I'm doing is so important to me. I really, and I think people are getting really tired of this fake facade thing. It's like, again, it was not a thing when we started with social media. We were in it, but now it's a thing, and it's like this whole like, oh God, your Facebook account makes it look like your life's amazing. But what about the when your baby does a shit all down your dress, and put a couple of those up. So, yeah.
All right, we've covered an amazing assortment of really rich themes, I think, today.
Yeah,
nice
you are a really good interviewer, man.
Well, thank you. I just try to focus on the things that I'm actually curious about in what a person says.
Yeah, that's what being an interviewer is, isn't it? You're not bringing your list of questions, is it? Yeah.
When you get some interviews on the podcast of people's practice journeys and stuff, let us know. We'll link to that. That's cool. Terrific.
I'm going to get several episodes done, and then I'm just going to drop them all at once and then build from there, rather than just do one and the next one.
Just and I'll tell you, let us know and remind us when that happens.
Yeah, and I'll be posting it on all the Integral Facebook pages and all that stuff. And but thank you so much for this interview, and the stuff that you and Bruce are putting out. I really like it. I think it's great, and you've had. I haven't checked out the ufology stuff yet. I'm looking forward to that, because I've always loved all of that kind of thing. Unfortunately, I've never had any experiences like that myself. I have seen a big black cat in the fields around my house, but it probably escaped in the 1970s from some rock star's mansion. Still living. But yeah. And I do hope that the beginning of our call wasn't too bad with the internet connection.
Yeah, it was choppy for maybe the first 15 or 20 minutes. I think the audio was good. But we'll see, because the way I see it on my screen isn't necessarily the way it turns out to be in the edit.
That's true. But that's another thing I like about your podcast, is it's real. It's like the production quality is good enough for it to be fine. All the stuff I've listened to, I've never had any problem understanding what people are saying, but there's this whole other side to podcasting, that's really produced. They're doing it in a studio, they hire out, they spend loads of money on mics and hiring studios, all that stuff. But I really like this kind of podcasting. It's just people in there.
I mean, there's some high production value ones that I enjoy, but I don't think that's what the medium calls for. Like, I think there's a relaxed mutuality and amateurness and a kind of ruggedness to it that's
Yeah,
important.
well, it makes you chill. I really like Joe Rogan's podcast. I really like Sam Harris's podcast. Those are really finely produced pieces of media. It's like very high end production, involving probably quite a lot of money. But all of that stuff gets you into performance mode. Some people, they go on Joe Rogan and they're just like, he gets them to drink coffee beforehand or something, and they're just like, not in a chilled space. So, yeah, congratulations.
Well,
I
thank
think
you very much. It's been nice to be with you.
You too. Yeah, that's what it feels like. We've just been together. Yeah.
All right. See you around, Ralph.
Yeah. Thanks very much, and I'll be in touch.
Yeah. Cheers, man.
Bye. Lots of love.